This girl was frozen alive. 24-year-old Chelsea Salvacion, a spa manager, stayed late at the spa to use the cryotherapy chamber, a futuristic pod meant to expose the body to sub-zero temperatures for a few short minutes. It was supposed to aid in recovery and reduce inflammation, but what was meant to be a 3-minute session lasted over 10 hours. Chelsea was found the next morning, frozen solid, locked upright in the chamber, her body exposed to negative 240-degree temperatures. It's believed she accidentally became trapped inside. Whether it was a mechanical failure or a tragic misstep remains unclear. What is known is that there was no safety personnel present and no automatic shutoff kicked in. Alone and unable to escape, Chelsea succumbed to hypothermia in just minutes. But her body wasn't discovered until hours later, a stark, horrifying reminder of just how dangerous cutting-edge wellness treatments can be. Her death sparked outrage, investigations, and urgent calls for regulation in the cryotherapy injury. But for Chelsea's family, friends, and co-workers, nothing could undo the night she was left to freeze to death, trapped in a machine designed to heal.
The incident with Rey Mysterio and El Perro Aguayo Jr. This was a wrestling match, a tag team match, where it was going to be one of the biggest wrestlers here in the United States being Rey Mysterio, one of the biggest wrestlers in Mexico being El Perro Aguayo Jr. Everybody's obviously excited to see this wrestling match, and it's going normal, it's going fine, they're going at it with each other and stuff, but in one specific part of the wrestling match, which is about to be the end basically, you see Rey Mysterio want to set up like his signature move, and it goes off script, because you know how wrestling is scripted, so it goes off script, and El Perro Aguayo Jr. he like falls out of the ring, but he falls awkwardly. He basically like hit the edge of the arena with his back. Oh my gosh, so he goes back on the arena because he knows that it was like not part of the script, and then that's when he gets drop kicked. And when he gets drop kicked, he goes against the ropes like he was supposed to, but he just kind of falls unconscious. Everybody's still like cheering and shit, you know. He's just knocked out. Rey Mysterio does his signature move. It just kind of goes over El Perro Aguayo Jr.'s head because he's still like, just laying there. Even somebody comes over and starts shaking him and like saying, yo bro, wake up, wake up, wake up. The wrestling match finishes and Rey Mysterio's team wins. Instead of cheering, everybody's still concerned because he has not moved from that same position. At this point, everybody goes over to him and realizes that he's not conscious, right? And he died live on TV.
Did Rey Mysterio get backlash after this?
Yeah, so after that whole incident happened, because it was an accident at the
Yeah.
a lot of people were sending Rey Mysterio death threats. He was even thinking about quitting wrestling completely.
Nothing sounds more psychologically twisted to me than to be a juror in a high-profile murder case, specifically when you know more about the case than you originally thought, or when you might even be involved in the murder itself. This is Justin Kemp, a writer who got stuck on jury duty for a very high-profile murder involving a woman named Kendall. Kendall was found dead after a night out at a bar in Savannah, Georgia. Being accused of killing her is the woman's boyfriend, who was seen yelling at her at the bar that night, eventually chasing her out into the parking lot. To this day, he maintains his innocence, but as more details in the case emerged, Justin realized that he was actually at the bar that same night, and coincidentally, he might have actually been involved in Kendall's death. So this is actually just the plot for the new crime movie called Juror Number 2, which is directed by Clint Eastwood. I just watched it, and I cannot stop thinking about it. Throughout the movie, Justin struggles with a moral dilemma being a juror. Should he do the right thing and come forward at the risk of destroying his own future? Or should he stay quiet and possibly send an innocent man to jail? This movie does a fantastic job at highlighting the true moral complexity that real jurors face in the legal system, especially in high-profile cases. It really shows how decisions in the courtroom can turn on one single moment, and how nothing can really prepare you for the psychological challenges you'll face when holding someone's entire future in your hands. Watch Clint Eastwood's Juror Number 2, now streaming on Max.
I got sexually assaulted by Joe Gatto, the Impractical Joker.
Joe Gatto, one of the stars of the TV show Impractical Jokers, has been accused of sexual assault. Now, according to the girl who posted the TikTok and shared her story about what allegedly happened, she's been talking about this for over a year and DMing celebrities trying to get someone to listen, but no one really paid attention until now. So according to her, she met Joe completely by chance while having brunch earlier that day, and here's a photo from that chance meeting. So afterwards, she DM'd him, and eventually she got tickets to go out and see him that evening at his comedy show. She also shared videos and photos of the show itself. And then afterwards, she got to meet Joe one more time. And here's where it gets weird. Here are some screenshots that allegedly show their conversations. You can pause to read them if you'd like. But according to her, eventually, after she had been drinking for a while, he invited her to come up to his apartment. Here's a screenshot showing that part of the interaction. Now, she hasn't shared with us exactly what happened when she got up to the apartment, but she did share this photo which allegedly shows the aftermath of the encounter. and she refers to this entire incident as a sexual assault and claims that she doesn't like to go back there in her mind and doesn't really like talking about what exactly happened. Now, we haven't received any response yet from Joe Gatto himself, but as a massive Impractical Jokers fan growing up, this is massively disappointing. And I'll keep you guys updated if anything else happens in this case, because I'm sure there are going to be more developments.
Don't watch this video unless you have all of your doors securely locked. This unsettling case will make you terrified of your neighbours. It was the 29th of July 1994 in Hamilton Township in New Jersey. Megan Kanker was just the sweetest little 7-year-old girl. She was living with her parents and her 2 siblings and was pretty well behaved for a little girl. However, like most 7-year-olds, I feel like she was a little bit unaware of the dangers of the outside world. On the day in question, Megan seemingly vanished from her home. Mum just happened to notice that Megan's bike was lay outside, but there was no sign of Megan anywhere. Like any mum would do, she frantically went round all of the neighbours, questioning them about whether they'd seen Megan. Unfortunately, she had no luck. Everyone denied seeing her, but one neighbour was lying. Now, unfortunately, Megan's mum had no choice but to call the police at this point, and the nightmare just started getting worse and worse. Police showed up and again questioned all of the neighbours, but one person's story didn't really seem consistent. This neighbour was Jesse Temendquas, and honestly, I'm probably totally butchering that name. He just seemed super suspicious to them, and they wondered why his story kept changing ever so slightly, so they decided to search his home. Now, he actually had 2 roommates, and when police actually looked into these roommates, they were stunned. Jesse and the 2 people he was living with were all S offenders. Now, this obviously really didn't look good with this little girl missing. They were also suspiciously seemingly doing quite a lot of laundry when the police came in that evening, and something else in the property would later be key as well. They had a little puppy. Now, the 2 roommates actually both had alibis for where they were at the time of Megan's disappearance, but Jesse was visibly nervous. He seemed to be shaking and sweating a lot. So much so that police decided to take him in for questioning, and originally he just denied all knowledge. But police decided to do a more thorough search of the home, specifically inside the bins. There they found the waistband of a pair of child's underwear, and they took this waistband to Megan's mum, and heartbreakingly, she confirmed that they were Megan's. It wasn't long before Jesse broke down and confessed in what feels like, honestly, a classic cautionary tale that you would tell children. Jesse had lured Megan over to his house with the promise of seeing his puppy. He arred her, then strangled her with a belt before disposing of her body in a nearby park. Bless her, Megan had really tried to fight him off, which was evident in the bite mark that Jesse had on his hand. Now, infuriatingly, he had been convicted of an S offence twice previously. How was he just allowed to carry on living his life like normal? In 1981, he essayed a 5-year-old girl in the woods, but just got a suspended sentence. Just a year later, he tried to essay and he choked a 7-year-old girl. He was released after just 6 years behind bars for apparent good behaviour. Now, he was initially given the death penalty for Megan's murder, but when this was abolished, it was changed to life in prison. Megan's death led to the creation of Megan's Law, which requires registered S offenders to make their information publicly available, including their name, address, and photo.
In 2001, Texas became the setting of one of the most hauntingly cruel crimes imaginable. 25-year-old Shantae Millard, high and intoxicated, was speeding down the road when she plowed into a homeless man named Gregory Biggs. The impact was horrific. It shattered her windshield and lodged Gregory halfway through the glass, his mangled body twisted and broken. But somehow, he was still alive, barely. His legs dangled outside the car, his head was bleeding, and he was conscious, gasping, moaning, begging for help. But Shantae didn't call 911. She drove home, parked her car in the garage, shut the door, and left him there. Gregory lay trapped in the shattered windshield, bleeding out onto her dashboard, suffering in agony for nearly 2 days. He cried out as his life slowly slipped away, just feet from where Shantae slept. When he finally died, alone and unheard, she tried to cover it up. She burned the car, lied, and placed Gregory's body in a park. But the truth bled through the cracks. Shantae Millard was eventually convicted of murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison. But no sentence could ever match the slow, silent horror Gregory endured. A man who was treated like roadkill, left to die in the dark.
I don't think there's ever been a family with more skeletons in their closet and horrific dark secrets than the Murdaugh family. If you live in South Carolina and this was 5 years ago, you'd probably hear the name Alec Murdaugh and think of a powerful, well-respected attorney. But in reality, this man was straight diabolical. Not only did he steal millions of dollars from his law firm and clients, he then proceeded to secretly murder his own wife and son in a desperate attempt to gain sympathy and delay the investigation into what he was doing behind closed doors. This all played out in a way that made him the victim. He said that he just so happened to discover his wife and son killed, and at first people believed him. But the mystery would only deepen when just a few months later, Alec himself would be found shot in the head on the side of the road. He did survive this, and most would think that he was attacked too, just like his family. But it would later be proven that he tried to stage his own murder so that his surviving son could collect on a $10 million insurance payout. This is one of the most disturbing yet confusing cases I have ever read about, and the layers go so deep with this family that include a string of suspicious deaths all tied to them. If you want to learn about this case from the very beginning, then you should read this book. It's called Tangled Vines, Power, Privilege, and the Murdaugh Family Murders by John Glatt. He reconstructs the rise of the Murdaugh family and the double murder that would rock the community. If this case is confusing to you, but you still want to learn everything about it, I'd suggest starting here for a clear breakdown.
What are you doing here? Where's our shoes? They like to follow you around here. The Beatty Mansion in St. Joseph, Missouri. Come on in. Right here in this stairwell, there was a for a drug-addicted girl. I first saw shadows and then heard singing, and then I heard the creaking of the banister up there and then dropping with a loud crack. People go there to die. Honestly, I don't go in here because I've heard things moving in there. I was down here the other day and I heard and in this window there is a fuzzy-headed woman who appears to be not quite together in the head, and she likes to scream, and she'll stand in that window. The house gets me. We were hearing people laughing and giggling and conversation and doors opening and shutting with the doorknobs and things like that. So they were like, is it always like this? They're excited you're here. I also saw a man who had kind of harassed her into it. And then there was another one down at the bottom of the steps who was clapping his hands, jumping up and down and peeing himself. So...
Tonight on the Paranormal Files, we're here in Missouri at the Beatty Mansion.
We would love to talk to you tonight.
You hear us.
Needle. The woman who her life.
Curse it.
Ew, it smells like diapers. Wait. One second.
I mean, there's no question for you that it's haunted.
Oh, absolutely.
Disturbing 911 calls. Back in 2019 in Arkansas, there was a woman, her name was Deborah Stevens, who was delivering newspapers, and out of nowhere it just started pouring down rain, like really bad, to the point where streets started flooding. So she ended up taking a different route because she still wanted to get the job done. Out of nowhere, her car got swept by the flood and she got stuck by like these trees. She couldn't get out. Keep in mind also, she's disabled, so even if she tried, she couldn't swim.
911, where's your emergency?
I have an emergency, a severe emergency. I'm in a flooding. My car veered off the road while I was doing my newspapers, and I'm flooded over here on the end of Kincaid, and it's all the way up to my windows, and I can't get out, and I'm scared to death, ma'am.
Okay, what's your name?
Debbie Stevens, please help me. I don't want to die.
You're not going to die. Hold on for a minute.
Well, I'm scared. I'm sorry.
As the call goes, the dispatcher, she starts showing attitude, and there's a point where she kind of blames Deborah for being in the situation. And I'm not gonna lie, you do end up hearing when her car actually gets like taken by the water too.
Somebody save me.
Am I not on the phone with you trying to get you some help?
Yes,
Okay,
but
stop.
when are they going to be here?
As soon as they get there.
I've had anything like this happen to me before.
Well, this will
I'm
teach you next time. Don't drive in the water.
couldn't see it, ma'am. I'm sorry, or I wouldn't.
I don't see how you didn't see it. You had to go right over it.
What a piece of I'm
Ma'am,
telling you, bro.
Right there. She showed 5801 at the end.
Standing out there watching.
Miss Debbie, you're going to have to shut up, okay? I need you to
I'm sorry.
listen to me. It's helping me ping your location, so don't hang up on me.
The most part about this whole thing also is that dispatcher, she was never fired, and the only reason why she was never charged was because that exact same day was her final shift. She had put her 2 weeks notice
exactly 2 weeks before that call.
That's why she was fucking acting like that.
And that's why she didn't really give a fuck.
There was no murder weapon because she killed him via text. This was the most controversial crime case of 2017. When someone dies at the hands of another person, we usually have a crime scene, DNA evidence, and a murder weapon. But what about when the weapon is the accused's own words? This is the case of death by text. Conrad Roy was an 18-year-old boy born in Massachusetts. He was a happy child when he was growing up with his sisters Morgan and Camden and their parents. He was very sporty, he was kind and a humble guy. It was when he was 16 that he really began suffering with his mental health when his parents divorced. And this was really hard for him, especially at his age. I feel like my parents divorced luckily when I was quite young, so I actually don't really remember it. But I'd imagine this would be really hard when you were a teenager. Following this, he battled more with his anxiety. He developed social anxiety and also depression. He met Michelle Carter, who was 17 at the time, in 2012 on a family holiday, and the pair stayed in touch when they returned home. Now, she was also struggling with her mental health with an ED and also anxiety and low mood, and the pair kind of confided in each other and regularly shared these deep conversations. But they lived 35 miles apart, so they only met really a handful of times. When Conrad was just 17 years old, he tried to unalive himself for the first time, but it seemed like he regretted this instantly and he reached out to a friend and was saved. Between October 2012 and July 2014, he attempted several more times, but would always contact a friend or just abandon his plan. On the 12th of July 2014, Conrad spent the day with his family before heading home and then ultimately heading out at about 6. He told his mum he was just going to go and meet a friend in his truck, but she had no idea she'd never see him alive again. He never came home, and his mum was obviously extremely worried about him, and it wasn't long before Conrad's sister got a strange message off Michelle. Now, Michelle told her that she and Conrad were now boyfriend and girlfriend, and she was wondering where he was. Pretty soon, the whole family was hunting for him. Tragically, the following day, Conrad's body was discovered. He'd unalived himself in his truck in the car park of a local Kmart. And although this at first seemed like a tragic instance of a boy making a devastating decision, what police found on his phone was horrific. Now, I can't read out the text on this app for obvious reasons, but I go into loads of detail about the individual text messages on my podcast, The Bourne Investigation. However, I'm going to summarize the gist of them on here. Michelle had seemingly kind of began pretty supportive of Conrad, and their messages kind of confirmed this. As I said, they shared their feelings with each other and kind of supported each other through the difficult times. But as the weeks went on, things began to change. Michelle just seemed to change her attitude towards Conrad. Now, she loved Leah Michelle, who was acting in the show Glee at the time, and there is a point to this story, I swear. Leah Michelle's on-screen and real-life boyfriend, Corey Monteith, had tragically died from an overdose in July 2013. Just the year prior to this case. Now, Michelle appeared to really idolize Leah Michelle and kind of have been watching like her interviews about Corey and things. She appeared to almost start to kind of go along with Conrad's plans and almost seemed to want the attention from it. Now, people wonder whether she kind of saw herself as Leah Michelle in this situation and kind of wanted like the attention and all of the sympathy that Leah Michelle had had. On one occasion, when Conrad was expressing how depressed he was and how he wanted to unalive himself, she casually said, "If you're going to do a last tweet, can it be about me?" And then she put "tag me" in a smiley face. She then began to start really actively encouraging Conrad to take action and even talked about plans with him, suggesting things, and she talked about creating a backup plan if his first plan didn't work. Now, when Conrad showed any kind of hesitation or seemed to be backing out of a plan in any way, she would ridicule him and get really angry at him. One text she said, "If you wanted it bad enough, then you'd at least try it, right?" And she also said that although his family, yes, they would be upset for a few weeks, they'd get over it. As I said, loads more texts, and they honestly are horrific, so if you do want to hear those, go over to the podcast. But she ended up essentially pressuring him every single day to take action, and on the evening in question, he finally succumbed. After he left home the final time, she asked him if he deleted the text between the two of them. So that just proved that she knew what she was doing was wrong. Now, Conrad started expressing doubts, but she was again encouraging him. Horrifically, it would later come out that Michelle stayed on the phone while Conrad did this, and at one point he said he couldn't do it and he got out of the truck. Michelle ordered him back inside, and then he died. She was ultimately charged with involuntary manslaughter, and like I said, this was an extremely controversial case. It really divided opinion. She was found guilty though and was sentenced to 15 months in prison.
Whomever coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
I killed and dismembered my friend because of a video game. My name is Daniel Petrie, and I was 16 at the time of the crime in 2007. I played video games regularly, and that's how I met Gabriel Kuhn, who was 12 at the time. We played almost all the time together, and one day he asked me if he could borrow 20,000 coins from a game called Tibia, the equivalent of $1,000. He promised to pay me back as soon as possible, so I agreed to lend him the coins he wanted. At that point, Gabriel stopped answering my messages, which surprised me greatly. He then removed me from his list of friends on our favorite game, and I never heard from him again. I couldn't believe it and went mad. So I drew up a plan for revenge. I hid in Gabriel's house and waited for Gabriel to be alone. And one day it was the perfect moment. His mother had left and he was alone. So I knocked on his door and he opened up to me. I forced my way into his house and locked the door. I then started torturing him and raped him. Then I took the power cable from his computer and strangled him with it. He stopped moving and I took his body and tried to take him to the cellar of the house. But as I moved him, I realized that his body was too heavy, so I started to cut off his legs. And that's when Gabriel started to wake up, but I continued what I was doing all the same. I then continued to move the body, and his brother arrived shortly afterwards, discovering the horrible crime scene I had committed.
This might be the most gruesome death of all time, and whatever you do, don't look up the picture. This is 18-year-old Nikki Castoris, and on Halloween 2006, she crashed her father's Porsche 11 driving at more than 100 miles per hour. She was trying to switch lanes when she suddenly clipped another car, lost control, and then flew over the middle of the highway onto traffic lanes and into a concrete toll booth. And when police arrived, they walked into literally a nightmare. They arrived minutes later and they found Nikki's body still strapped to the driver's seat, but her head, however, was no longer attached to it. Nikki's head was completely severed in half and it wasn't a head anymore. I can't even describe what it looks like because it's so disturbing. The wreckage and the scene were so brutal that the coroner wouldn't let her parents identify her body. But unfortunately, her parents were not spared from seeing the gruesome scene. Photographs of Nikki's death had somehow found their way onto the internet and they spread extremely quickly. MySpace pages who were acting as some sort of tribute for Nikki's death posted the horrifying pictures of the accident. Nikki's parents then received countless emails of the photographs, and there was no escaping the trauma. I really urge you never to look up this photo because it might be one of the most disturbing things you will ever see. This case should be an eye-opener to everybody to not drive recklessly, because as you can tell, your life can be taken from you in a split second.
Okay, actually though, that's a crazy story. Kayla Unbian was just 9 years old in 2017 when she was abducted in Chicago. Her father had just won custody of her, and when he went to go pick her up from a camping trip that her and her mother was on, she was gone. Kayla's mom took her and they split, and he was pretty sure that he was never going to see her again. But then Netflix has this show called Unsolved Mysteries, and they aired an episode about children that were kidnapped by their parents. At the end of the episode, they flash this image on the screen, and it is only on screen for 4 seconds. But then flash forward to last month, there's a person shopping in a grocery store in North Carolina, and she sees this woman in the store and she's like, that's the woman from the poster. The woman in question is with a 16-year-old girl, so the shopper runs to the front desk and is like, we have to call the cops right now. And they were right. The cops picked them up and they were able to reunite Kayla with her dad 5 years later. This goes to show that even when you're watching something really fast, your brain is still registering it and you can still use that information to potentially help someone.
My husband killed me and bricked me into a wall after a violent argument, and my body was only discovered 9 years later in the attic of our house. My name is Sabora Gagani, and I was 22 years old at the time of the incident in 2014. I was living with my boyfriend, Marco Gallo Romero, who was 36 years old at the time. Initially, everything seemed fine, but I quickly realized that it was just a facade of his personality because our relationship became toxic. I even talked to my mother, informing her that I urgently needed to break free from his control and leave, but I didn't have time to do so. On July 7th, 2014, Marco and I had an argument, and he stabbed me. He then decided to make a hole in the wall of the attic of our house, and that's where he chose to hide my body. My family quickly became worried about my disappearance, and Marco assured them that I had run away without leaving a trace. Yet he knew the truth. It was on May 17th, 2022 that Marco was arrested, not for my murder, but for that of his girlfriend Paula. He stabbed her 14 times. Once at the police station, he confessed to killing me and bricking me 9 years earlier. He then pointed out the exact location of my body, and I was able to be identified by the tattoos I had on my body. So, in your opinion, what punishment does he deserve?
I was tortured to death and raped by 100 gang members. My name is Junko Furuta, and this is my story. I was only 17 years old and living a peaceful life in Tokyo. I was a studious student, but everything changed when my classmate Hiroshi Miyano made advances towards me, which I refused. On November 22nd, 1988, when I was walking home from school, I was kidnapped by him and 3 other men. They took me to a hotel. They held me captive and tortured me for 44 long days. I was raped and beaten every day. I was their punching bag. They started by inserting all sorts of objects like lighted bulbs and fireworks into my private parts. They also had fun hanging me from the ceiling with ropes. They made me take my own urine and eat all kinds of insects, including cockroaches. Then my tormentors invited other people to participate in my rape and torture. On January 4th, 1989, after losing a game of video game, they beat me for 2 hours with a baseball bat, and burned my eyelids with hot wax. I was disfigured. I no longer had any strength. They ended up burning me alive. I succumbed to my injuries. Right after that, Hiroshi Miyano was sentenced to 17 years in prison, but some received only 8 years in prison and were released.
I bet you didn't know that the original Barbie was based on an R-rated German escort doll. My page is all for people with dark curiosities, and if that's you, I think you'll like the podcast. Okay, so in the 1940s, there was this very provocative German cartoon called Build Lily. And Lily was described as being a gold-digging call girl who would seduce wealthy men. And mind you, this is the 40s, so this is really dicey for the time. Like, here's Lily joking about taking her bikini off in front of a police officer. So by the 50s, they make a doll version of her that's like a gag gift. It's even dicier and more inappropriate than the cartoon was, and men loved it. They just basically gave it to each other. So around this time, Ruth Handler, who's one of the co-founders of Mattel, is traveling Europe. And she sees the slutty Lily dolls and she's like, oh, girls in America will love this. And then in 1959, she debuts Barbie at the New York Toy Fair. Like, you can see that Barbie is just a spitting image of Lily. And apparently Ruth knew it too because she bought the rights to Build Lily and she put them out of business. Just something to remember when you watch the movie this month. Barbie was based on a girl who was way ahead of her time.
This is a very recent case, and it's the story of 8-year-old Jackson Morrow. Having an 8-year-old son myself, this one really hits hard. Jackson lived in Michigan with his parents, Mia and Brian. The couple had been investigated multiple times by Child Protective Services over the treatment of Jackson, but he was never removed from their care. This is a prime example of being failed by the system. Jackson attended school at the Logan Autism Learning Centre, but the couple soon became sick of the teachers reporting them to CPS for mistreating Jackson, and they pulled him out. Brian Morrow also has a daughter who used to live with the couple and Jackson. She stated to police that they didn't like to deal with their son as he smelt like urine, and they'd often lock him away in his bedroom, ignoring his cries. He even broke the bottom of his door so that he could stick his hand out. On May 3rd, 2022, 911 responded to a call from Jackson's grandmother. When they arrived at the Morrows' home, they found Jackson laying on the couch, and it was clear that he hadn't only just passed away. Jackson was extremely thin, and the couple soon revealed to police that he'd actually passed away the day before. They hadn't called authorities because they wanted to spend time with their son before they came and took him away. Later that day, the couple were tested for drugs, and both tested positive for methamphetamine. Jackson's autopsy revealed that he was extremely malnourished. He weighed just 31 pounds, which medical records show was the same weight that he was at just 3 years old. His cause of death was neglect, and it was treated as a homicide. In June 2022, both Mia and Brian Morrow were arrested and charged with 1 count each of first-degree murder. Both Mia and Brian had their charges reduced to second-degree murder after agreeing to plea deals. Mia agreed to serve a minimum of 25 years, and Brian agreed to serve a minimum of 22 years. On sentencing Mia, Judge Laseta criticised her for doing nothing as her autistic son wasted away before her eyes. She said, "He looked to you to protect him. I don't understand this. He weighed just 31 pounds at the age of 8 years old." On March 13, 2023, Mia Morrow received a sentence of 25 to 50 years. And Brian Morrow is due to be sentenced on April 17, 2023.
These are the Tylenol murders, one of America's greatest mysteries. The Tylenol murders are a series of poisoning deaths that occurred in the Chicago area in September 1982. The case remains one of the most infamous instances of product tampering and led to significant changes in the packaging and marketing of all over-the-counter medications. In the early days of September 1982, 7 people in the Chicago area died after ingesting extra-strength Tylenol capsules that had been tampered with. The victims ranged in ages from 12 to 35, and their deaths were initially attributed to cyanide poisoning. The tampering occurred after the capsules were manufactured and before they reached the store shelves. An unknown person or persons had removed the Tylenol capsules from their original packaging, added cyanide to the pills, and then placed them back into the packages. The tampered bottles were then placed on store shelves for sale. The discovery of the poisoned Tylenol capsules led to widespread panic and fear. Authorities warned the public not to consume any Tylenol products, leading to a massive recall of over 31 million bottles of Tylenol capsules. Other pharmaceutical companies also pulled their products from shelves even though they had not been tampered with, due to concerns about copycat crimes. Law enforcement launched a massive investigation into the Tylenol murders but struggled to identify the culprit or culprits. The tampering appeared to be random and no connections were found between the victims. The perpetrator had seemingly contaminated Tylenol bottles at various locations. The media coverage of the Tylenol murders was extensive and it had a lasting impact on public perception of product safety. The incident resulted in changes to the way companies package and seal over-the-counter medications to ensure the safety of consumers. No one has ever been charged or convicted in the connections with the Tylenol murders. However, the case prompted Congress to pass the Federal Anti-Tampering Act in 1983, making it a federal offense to tamper with consumer products. The Tylenol murders serve as a chilling reminder of the potential dangers of product tampering and the importance of stricting security measures in the manufacturing and packaging of consumer goods. The victims' families and the public in general were forever changed by this act of intentional poisoning. And the case continues to be a cautionary tale.
This 60-year-old grandfather was murdered while playing Pokemon Go by an armed security guard. So this is Jiansheng Cheng. He was a grandfather who lived in Virginia, and he used to play Pokemon Go with his family members to connect with them. His family members said he played this game exclusively to get closer to members of his family and spend time with them. So on the night of January 26, 2017, Jiansheng was driving through a neighborhood, and he entered private property which belonged to a community clubhouse. 10 days earlier, he had been cited for trespassing on this private property, but on that evening, for some reason, he drove back in search of Pokemon. So that night, recognizing the same blue van, Jonathan Cromwell, an armed security guard, approached the grandfather. So according to the investigation, Jiansheng was in the parking lot of the clubhouse when Jonathan noticed him and stopped his vehicle directly in front of Jiansheng's. Jiansheng's car was effectively blocked in. He then put his car in reverse, turned his vehicle around so that it was in the entrance of the parking lot, so he was about to leave. And that's when Jonathan Cromwell, for some reason, exited his vehicle, screamed out stop, and then for some reason pulled out his weapon and fired 10 shots at the car. For some reason, Jonathan fired several rounds through the side window of the van and then went to the windshield and fired directly at Jiansheng through the windshield. The grandfather was hit 5 different times and died on scene. Now, this was tragic news for the community, and people saw this shooting as totally unneeded and unwarranted. But when they'd learn the full truth of the situation, people would get pissed. So Jonathan had lied and said that Jiansheng tried to ram him with his vehicle, which didn't happen. And he was originally charged with second-degree murder, but after new information came out, this charge was upgraded to first-degree murder. You see, Jonathan had a pretty disturbing history working as an armed security guard. In the past, he had drawn and brandished his weapon at people who were members of the clubhouse, guests of the Riverwalk neighborhood, and unarmed civilians, and he was known to go beyond the boundaries of his duties and use excessive force. This use of excessive force had actually gotten him fired from an employer in the past as well. So eventually in 2019, Jonathan Cromwell was found guilty of murder and he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. This crime was just so unnecessary, and it's so shocking because a grandfather was literally murdered while playing a children's game that he loved playing with his kids.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This is one of the worst Colombian cartel execution videos explained. This is Maria Viabla, and she was a 17-year-old girl who went missing, and immediately after this, her parents contacted authorities saying she had gone missing, which prompted a search. The authorities searched the farm she was supposed to be working at. However, authorities came across a gruesome discovery. They found a man's corpse missing his head, which proved Maria was in great danger. A video then started circulating online showing Maria staring blankly into the camera. She had her hands tied behind her back and was already beaten bad by her captors. However, all hope to finding Maria faded when another terrible video began to circulate on the internet, showing the unfortunate end Maria suffered. The video is short and it's around 33 seconds, but it's absolutely grotesque and disturbing. As you play the video, you're met with pure savagery. The setting is in a wooded area and it's shot during the daytime. Immediately, you see Maria's corpse lying on the ground and you hear her killers talking in the background. The camera then focuses on her exposed stomach and you see a cartel member taking a knife that has a hook shape, cutting a vertical gash down her abdominal area. He slices in a downward motion from the top of her abdominal to the bottom of her stomach area. And you hear awful noises as the blade cuts through flesh. It's extremely graphic and it's just awful. Maria's stomach and intestines are exposed and it appears the killer is trying to cut them out. He pulls on her intestines and what also appears to be her stomach, and slowly they come out of Maria's body as he pulls, and eventually he cuts out Maria's stomach and several feet of intestines. He then holds Maria's guts up to the camera as the other cartel members continue to talk. You then get a clear shot of Maria's body and it looks like the cartel member has completely disemboweled her. The killer then throws her guts on the ground and the video then concludes. How Maria was killed is unknown, but in the video you see lots of blood on her face and head, which means she might have suffered a head injury that killed her. The motive for the murder seems to be completely unknown, but people online suspect she was involved romantically with a suspected gang member. But that is not confirmed at all. Maria's body was found in a river in September 2022 and was returned to her family for a proper burial. The murder of Maria to this day is unsolved, and this case and video is absolutely sickening. Whatever you do, never go looking for this video, and hopefully this explanation was enough to make you less curious.
When this model's body was found in her pool, police had to work out whether it was a callous murder or a tragic accident. Samira Frash was a 38-year-old French model who lived a lavish lifestyle until her tragic death in 2014. Samira lived in the lovely community of Golden Eagle in Florida. On the 22nd of February 2014, her body was discovered in her garden swimming pool. A handyman and his son had a horrific shock when they found her body deceased in the pool. Now, Samira's sandals were actually in the pool, one tucked under a hose that was in the water. Initially, it wasn't clear whether she'd been murdered or had simply fallen into the pool and drowned by accident. Now, she came from more humble beginnings, initially being born into poverty, but becoming famous for her beauty. She made a name for herself doing catwalks in Paris and met a man who caught her eye in 2006. This was Dr. Adam Frash, who was a podiatrist. The pair got married in Vegas and they got a property in Florida. They had 2 daughters together and enjoyed their lavish lifestyle. However, it would all come crashing down following the discovery of Samira's body. Investigators soon realised that the evidence didn't match up with an accidental drowning theory. Samira's sandals that were found off in the pool actually had straps, so they wouldn't just be able to fall off her feet. Then a shocking report from the medical examiner. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, showing damage to both sides of her skull. This was extremely unlikely to happen by accident from a fall. Now, they ruled out the handyman and his son from the CCTV evidence, which showed that the pair had simply just turned up a few minutes before calling police. So they started to look at potential enemies that Samira might have had. One of these was her husband's friend, Kendall, who was quite open about his dislike for Samira. He said that they didn't get on because of how much time he spent with her husband, but he actually had an alibi on the day of the murder. Then police interviewed Adam, the husband, who told them that the day before his wife's death, she complained to him that she was really tired and run down and needed a break. He said that he offered to take the two kids to their beach house 3 hours away. He said the morning of her death, he left with the kids and she was still in bed. However, it soon came to light that the pair were actually in the middle of getting a divorce. Adam had been allegedly having affairs. There was also a disturbing history of DV between the two of them, and Samira had even been arrested for domestic battery against him. When he was questioned, Adam had visible scratch marks on his face, and a man claimed that Adam had admitted the killing to him. Ultimately, he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his wife. This chilling case is described as Melbourne's most brutal unsolved double killing. Suzanne Armstrong was a 28-year-old single mother. She was living with 27-year-old Susan Bartlett, who was working as a teacher. Susan worked at the Collingwood Education Centre and the pair were high school friends. It was 1977 and they'd been living in their apartment on Easy Street for 10 weeks. It was a nice home for the pair and they shared it with Suzanne's 16-month-old son Gregory and their pet German Shepherd puppy. On the evening of the 10th of January 1977, Susan's brother and his girlfriend had popped round. They ate food with the pair and watched TV, and then they eventually headed home around 9 p.m. The following day, the neighbours found the German Shepherd puppy wandering around the streets looking lost. They also heard what could be described as whimpering from a child coming from the apartment. It would be 3 days later that the neighbours decided to actually take a look into the apartment and tried to enter via the back door. Upsettingly, Gregory was found in his cot very distressed and dehydrated. He was anxious and understandably very hungry. Then they made a shocking discovery. The women's bodies were found near the front of the property deceased. Suzanne was found on her bed and Susan was found lying in the hallway next to Suzanne's room. They had multiple stab wounds each and Suzanne had been AR'd following her death. When police arrived, they took a DNA sample from this. The police determined both women had been killed on the night of the 10th of January. Strangely, there was no signs of forced entry, but there was a boot print on one of the windowsills, which could have been a point of entry. Whoever had killed these women had cleaned up in the bathroom before leaving via the back door. They had left the gate open, hence the puppy walking around. The murder weapon was never recovered. Police compiled a list of over 100 persons of interest in this case, including construction workers who were in the area near the time. They tested the DNA that they found on Suzanne's body against some of the prime suspects in the case, but had no luck. Now, it is speculated that the murders may be linked to the disappearance of a woman nearby called Julie. She had actually disappeared from her apartment in Melbourne on the 1st of July 1975. Disturbingly, the suspect in her disappearance had actually been staying in the house next to the Easy Street killings on that night. The case frustratingly went cold and has still never been solved. In 2017, 40 years after the murders, police actually offered a reward of up to $1 million for information leading to the apprehension and conviction of those responsible. This case will make you terrified to go to Target. Kelsey Smith was 17 years old living in Kansas. On the 2nd of June 2007, she decided to head over to Target for the evening. It was roughly around 7 p.m. and she was planning on getting her boyfriend a gift to celebrate their 6 months together. While inside the shop, she spoke to her mum on the phone and Kelsey left shortly after. Later that evening, when she failed to return home, her concerned family called the police. Worryingly, about 4 hours after, Kelsey's car was discovered in a Macy's car park across the road. Now, Kelsey was nowhere to be seen, but to her family's concern, some of her belongings were discovered in the car. This included the gift that she bought for her boyfriend and her bag and purse. Now, police examined CCTV from the Target and found that she'd left at around 7:07 p.m. All seemed normal at first. She was just leaving the store and heading to her car in the car park. However, very disturbingly, investigators saw what looked like someone running towards her, and the images captured a male pushing Kelsey into her car. On closer inspection of the CCTV, police were able to notice a male seemingly following Kelsey round the shop. Although he didn't speak to her or approach her, he definitely was kind of following her around the store. He always ended up in the same aisle that she was in, and he seemed to be looking at her. Investigators released the CCTV images to the public in hopes of getting some tips. This would prove to be vital in the investigation. Now, the CCTV from the Macy's car park showed Kelsey's car being left there at 9:17 p.m. This was around 2 hours after she left the Target. Interestingly, a person with a white top and seemingly like dark coloured trousers was seen leaving the car there. The person was then captured running away from the scene, and the clothing matched what the suspect from the Target CCTV was wearing. When police tried to get Kelsey's phone records from her phone company, they were strangely hesitant. It would actually take 4 whole days for them to agree to give over the information. Now they were finally able to identify where Kelsey's phone had last pinged, and this was a tower near Grandview in Missouri. Tragically, when search teams were deployed, it wasn't long before they discovered Kelsey's body. The autopsy showed that she had been SA'd prior to her death and then strangled with her own belt. Meanwhile, the suspect's neighbour had called the police. She'd seen the news appeals for information and recognised the man as 26-year-old Edwin Hall. Now, he was actually reportedly off on holiday with his partner and son when police showed up. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Forensics were also able to find his fingerprints on the inside of Kelsey's car, despite him protesting his innocence. It's believed that he abducted Kelsey at gunpoint and drove her to the secluded area before killing her. He eventually pleaded guilty to all charges and was given life without parole. The case led to the birth of the Kelsey Smith Act. Now, the law states that phone companies can ping a phone if police believe that the owner is in danger, and most US states have now passed this law.
This is the murder of Eric Hingston. Eric was 83 years old when he was murdered. His bedroom window was open, a set of ladders were placed outside, and a scene of open drawers and missing jewellery suggested a robbery gone wrong. But there was something far more sinister that the police had yet to uncover. Eric was a retired butcher, and in his younger years he was a member of Churchill's Special Operations Executive in World War II. He was one of the heroes chosen by Churchill himself to fly behind enemy lines into Germany and set Europe ablaze, defeating the Nazis. A wonderful man who lived a full life. Eric had been married, had children and grandchildren, but tragically lost his wife in the early 80s. Just 18 months after his wife's death, Eric met and married a woman named Audrey. Audrey was also a widow, having lost her husband to a heart attack. Audrey and Eric were both looking for the same thing in a new partner: company. Eric's family called it a marriage of convenience. They both lost their life partners and were lonely. His children were worried that he'd rushed into this marriage and didn't know much about his new wife. As the marriage went on, the couple had an active social life and were known around the village as the local old couple. Unfortunately, as Eric grew older, his health deteriorated. He ended up with a hip replacement, a catheter, and became severely asthmatic. Audrey begrudgingly became his carer. The couple's social life soon came to a stop, and Audrey was not happy with this. She hated being stuck inside caring for her sick husband, and soon came up with a plan to get rid of him for good. On August 28, 2003, 81-year-old Audrey put her plan into action. She placed the ladder outside Eric's open bedroom window, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, went up the stairs and stabbed her sleeping husband in the shoulder, breaking his collarbone, which then punctured his lung. This single stab wound was fatal. Audrey then staged a robbery, opening drawers in the bedroom and placing some of her jewellery into black bin bags. She then waited 2 hours before calling an ambulance, saying, "We've been attacked. My husband's on the floor. Please come quickly. I think he's dead." When police arrived, Audrey was really tearful, saying that 2 men had attacked them, killed Eric and ransacked the house. Audrey then put out a heartfelt plea for anyone with information to come forwards, and it was surprisingly convincing.
Somebody somewhere knows who did this. I ask them, and my family asks them, to please contact the police. If you have any information at all, Please pass it to the police. On a personal note, may I thank you for all the love and kindness you've shown us. But please, please do anything you can to help us. Thank you.
She even went as far as pointing the finger at two men that she'd seen walking around the village. Thankfully, they had cast iron alibis when questioned by police. After 5 weeks of looking for Eric's killer, forensic examinations proved that there was nobody else in the house that night, and Audrey's lies unravelled. She eventually confessed to her son that she'd been the one to kill Eric. In March 2004, Audrey pleaded not guilty to murder, and instead pleaded guilty to manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. On sentencing Audrey, Mrs. Justice Hallett said, "It's a very sad day to see a woman of your age and background in the dock for the killing of your husband and covering it up in such a cold and calculating way." Audrey was sentenced to 2 years, making her Britain's oldest woman at the time to be jailed. Eric's family were really disappointed with the sentence, saying, "We feel betrayal, disappointment and anger. If someone kills another person, then they should pay the price. We believe that Audrey should have got at least 5 years. We've got to accept it, but it's destroyed our faith in the justice system." Audrey served just 1 year of her 2-year sentence and was released in 2005. She then passed away in 2016, aged 83.